conception of freedom that underlies the United States, and actually I think also most of the digital right work in Europe. If that is your perception, then the canonical example of an unfree person is somebody who is in a prison, a prisoner. Yeah, prisoner has no space, can't go anywhere, is interfered on all sides, literally, and can't do anything. In this perception of freedom, laws and regulations are forms of interference. And they are necessary because they need to enable the freedom of others. So they are there that you don't encroach and you don't interfere with others. But we do see them, we want to minimize them. We want to have as little laws as possible because laws mess with our freedom. And so this concept of freedom, if this is your idea of what it means to be free, then it's quite easy to criticize government surveillance because that is actually interfering with you and in a way that is not nice. But it makes it much harder to criticize Google and Facebook because they are not limiting your options. You don't have to use them. You have a choice. And actually they are creating new options. They have great services. Everybody here, I'm sure, has been using, if they're not from Toronto, has been using Google Maps to get here, etc. So they're great services. So it's hard to criticize Google and Facebook from a negative liberty or negative freedom concept, from this liberal idea. Still, when I spend a lot of time de-Googling myself, so I literally took the effort to make sure that I don't have my email with them anymore, that I don't use Google Drive, that I do all these other things. It made me worse off in sort of any objective measure. Yes, I can't find my emails anymore. I have to come to this conference with OpenStreetMap, which is really a trial, I can tell you, on my phone. I had to set up a manual sync between my phone and Nextcloud to get my pictures. All that stuff is really complicated and works way less well than I was with Google. However, I did feel liberated. So for some reason, even though I'm materially worse off, I did feel more free, literally, in quite a literal sense. It was a real feeling for me. And so I tried to understand, why is that the case? Where does that freedom come from? What type of freedom is that? And so how is that possible? So we enter another philosopher, in this case. This is Philippe Petit, not to be confused with Philippe Petit. This is one of my heroes, the guy who in the 70s walked on a tightrope between the two World Trade Center towers 8 times. They had to try and get him off with a helicopter. Not this guy, his name is very similar, but this guy, slightly more boring Princeton professor called Philippe Petit. His idea, he wrote a book, and it has a very unfortunate name, Republicanism, a theory of freedom of government. Because republicanism, you have to think of sort of the republic more in the Roman, Athenian sense of the word, not republicanism in the Trump sense of the word. So this is the idea that the res publica, yes, so the government should be in hands of the public. And what he says in that, he argues that there is actually a third concept of freedom next to the two that Berlin has argued. And this is the concept of freedom as non-domination. So this is the sense that you can only be free if there is a complete absence of arbitrary control over what you do. And the canonical example of an unfree person is not a prisoner, but it is the slave. And a slave is very problematic from a liberal point of view because if a slave would have a benevolent master that would give the slave relatively a lot of space, the slave could do what they want, in a sense, then the liberal point of view would have to say that this person would have a measure of freedom, in a sense. Whereas from this perspective, you would say, yes, but this person is actually, his freedom or her freedom is enabled by the fact that the master is giving that space, and the master can at any point in time in a completely arbitrary way pull that back. So this person, you can't argue that they are free. And with this perspective of freedom as non-domination, a law and regulation actually becomes constitutive of freedom. You need laws because laws are actually non-arbitrary. In a decent democracy, a participatory democracy, laws are created in a way that they are the same for everyone, that they should work for everyone, and so that you actually need them. And from that perspective, you start seeing sort of freedom as a structural relationship rather than as some sort of contingent, one-time event that is around where are you interfered or not. And I think that's a much more productive way of looking at freedom, even when you're talking about the freedom of speech debates, all these sort of things. It is about power relationships in a sense. And so now it becomes much more easy to see how Google and Facebook are, in a very literal sense, making us less free. Because our relationship with them is very arbitrary. We are very dependent on their services. I was discussing with a friend just now that as an NGO, I think we literally can't afford not to be on Facebook because we wouldn't reach an audience anymore, and I think that's the same for many, many NGOs. So the dependence is true and real. But at the same time, Facebook could just turn us off whenever they want, yes? Completely arbitrary way, they would be in their right. I have no recourse, I have no redress. So I want to take a tiny detour into surveillance capitalism, this concept by Shoshana Zuboff, which is the way I think that we are becoming dependent on Google and Facebook in a way that is not good. So if you want to become a surveillance capitalist, you have to do 4 things, or 3 things actually, I should say. Step 1, gather as much data as possible. You can see that this is what Facebook and Google are continuously doing. Step 2, use machine learning algorithms and data scientists to analyze the data and create predictions. So basically what you do is you analyze the data, you create a model, and the model predicts behavior. And the next thing is you sell, in step 3, you sell those predictions on predictions markets. And so the currently the number 1 prediction market is advertising, but you can imagine any sort of prediction of behavior could work. And then if you can predict behavior, then of course you can also manipulate behavior, especially if you are the one that is creating the environment. So we're in a situation where Google and Facebook can certainly do that. And if you do sort of like the illicit step 4, then you create and manipulate the behavior that you want. And that's exactly what this whole Cambridge Analytica debate is about, because then you can maybe elect Trump or arrange a Brexit or do any of these things. So Google and Facebook's powers are arbitrary. There's dependence and there's at the same time no redress. So what are we to do? Well, the classic thing in Republican thought is if there is a power imbalance, you need to organize anti-power. So you need to find a way to address this. And this is not anti-power, the table tennis material. I love this slide because it says, anti-power kills not only the opponent's spin, but also its power, plus ensure counter-attacking. So it could have worked, but this is for table tennis. Now, anti-power this is what Pettit writes about it. He says, we may compensate for imbalances by giving the powerless protection against the resources of the powerful, by regulating the use that the powerful make of their resources, and by giving the powerless new empowering resources of their own. So we may consider the introduction of protective, regulatory, and empowering institutions. And so, for us, that defines our positive agenda of what it is that we should be doing. So first of all, protection. So I think that things like data protection legislation and the use of encryption are both ways that we can protect and inoculate ourselves against the powers of Google and Facebook. Then regulation. I think it's incredibly important to start thinking about antitrust. To me, it's ridiculous that we allow Facebook to buy WhatsApp or Instagram, etc. We need to stop making these companies larger, because many of the problems that we have from them in this power imbalance come from the fact that they are so big. And finally, empowerment. So I think this is a key why we need free software. So free software in the sense of open source, that word of free, that is literally the freedom that we mean, I think. Here we have a fan. And federated technology. So those are the things that can truly empower the user. So I want to ask, are you with me on that program. Thank you very much, and looking forward to speak more.
Thank you, Hans. Thank you for our four speakers, and the floor is for you, audience. If you have any questions to ask them, they're here to answer your questions. I think we have 5 more minutes we could use for questions and answers. You're free.
I'll ask a question. Yep. I really loved Hans's talk. Do you have like a book or anything like that coming out, or where you publish your ideas and put that out there?
So these are just academic ideas that I reuse and repurpose. So I think Philip Pettit, the philosopher, he doesn't connect his theory to the digital world, so I've done that. So I've written a bachelor thesis about this that I can share, but also his book, he's written a book that was more for the general public, not so academic philosophy, which is called Just Freedom, in the sense of justice, which is a great book to read, I think.
Hello. Well, I really like your talk, but my question is for Prof. IGF. Sorry. And I think I was late for the first. Yeah, I like your talk.